All right. So, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to present our webinar here for Simplified Professional Licensing for Architectural Engineering and Construction Firms today. Because so many firms across the United States share a fundamental challenge, and that's how to meet all the regulatory requirements faced by AEC firms across the country. Perhaps your firm is facing difficulties maintaining and renewing licenses and managing qualifying engineers. Maybe you're looking to operate, hire, or employ people in other states. And perhaps you feel like reacting and responding, not leading your firms through these events. It's even more important when new business opportunities arise, since firms need to be in good standing to bid on new jobs. I'm here to tell you you're not alone and to share our expertise in maintaining multi-state compliance. Before we get started, two brief housekeeping items. First, we have a relatively large number of attendees on the call today. For that reason, the audience will be muted. Second, a reminder that today's presentation is eligible for continuing education credit through Earmark. So I'll go over how to get your CE credit at the end of the presentation. So for starters, my name is Jordan Sonopoli. I am an account executive here at Harbor Compliance. My email address is listed here. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you think of a question after the call, whether that's today, tomorrow, or in the future. I'll also show my contact information at the end of the webinar as well. Moving on to slide 3 here. A little bit about Harbor Compliance. We're experts in architectural engineering and contractor licensing. Since 2012, we've helped offer 440,000 clients, I wish 40,000 clients simplify navigating regulatory requirements. In the AEC industry alone, we've helped over 8,700 AEC firms apply for, secure, and maintain licensing, business lifecycle, and tax requirements. More about us later, but for now, we have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. Our agenda for today. First, we're going to cover the benefits of compliance and how it helps your firm strategically. Then we'll discuss what to expect in AEC firm licensing. This ties closely to the business entity issues that arise for firms expanding into new jurisdictions. Because these are regulated at the state and even local levels, we'll keep the discussion broad enough to address key concepts, but we'll illustrate a few examples that multi-state firms and many of you are facing. We'll discuss the comprehensive management solution that firms need to comply with all regulations, avoid potential issues, and mitigate risk, and how, with a proactive approach, firms can be better primed to compete. Many of you probably already understand the importance of licensing compliance because if you're licensed architect or engineer, you've been maintaining a license since you graduated college. But it's essential to also consider how maintaining compliance can create value for your firm. One of the things that we'll cover today is why firms need to focus on both individual and firm licenses to maintain good standing, and how those two things are connected. There are plenty of reasons why compliance is important beyond just being a law. It unlocks opportunities. For example, organizations commonly list the states that they're licensed to operate on their website to highlight their reach and expertise. It enables firms to pursue new business, meet their timelines, and gain an edge over competitors that haven't been as proactive. It also safeguards your firm's reputation. Staying in good standing avoids penalties and avoids damaging how your firm is perceived. And it upholds the overall professional standards of architects, engineers, and contractors. So there are clear benefits, but what does the licensing process actually look like? So our licensing basics, as professionals, you already know the basics of licensing. You know that that AEC firms are regulated by state and local agencies for public safety reasons. Licensing helps build public trust that bridges that the bridges and buildings around us are safe and sound. You also know that the licensing process requires engineers and architects to complete professional education, sit for proficiency exams, and keep up to date with continuing education credits, which they then report to the state licensing boards as part of renewing their license. You probably also know that firms also face licensing requirements. Before companies can apply for these licenses, known as certificates of authorization, they need to ensure that their legal entities meet certain requirements around naming, business structure, and ownership. Once these prerequisites are made, they have to register their legal entity with the Secretary of State, and importantly, they have to select at least one qualified individual as in response, professional in charge, professional in responsible charge, aka qualifier, when applying for an AEC license. From that point, both the firm and the individual need to renew their licenses regularly, and the legal entity needs to maintain registration with the Secretary of State or local equivalent. The link between the qualifier licenses and the firm certificate of authorization is absolutely key. If the qualifier fails to maintain their license, it puts the entire firm's ability to transact business in that jurisdiction is at risk. Something that's vital to recognize is that even though each state might have its own unique requirements, which we'll dig into deeper a little bit later, they don't exist in a vacuum. In fact, nearly every licensing board asks about legal and financial penalties occurring in their state. That means that if you fail to complete your regular licensing requirements in one state, the damage can spread to everywhere you do business. In other words, when you lose good standing in one state, you might also lose eligibility to apply for licenses elsewhere. Now I'd like to start on the four most common challenges that we see in managing AEC licenses. Managing qualifiers, securing new licenses, managing renewals, and monitoring changes to requirements. So let's dive right in with managing the individual licenses of professionals tied to your certificates of authorization. These are referred to by a lot of different names, such as professionals responsible in charge, managing agent, qualifying professional, etc. For simply, we use the catch-all terms qualifiers. A qualifier is the licensed individual designated on your firm's license as being responsible for the firm's work in that said state. As the saying goes, theirs is the license on the line. Managing qualifiers is critical for businesses because as we just outlined, the licensure of the individual directly impacts the overall standing of the firm's license. The quote from the state of Illinois illustrates how important this is. The design firm will be inoperable for all professions in the license of one managing agent becomes inactive or not renewed. That's why it's essential to be on top of every single license for professionals in charge. In most states, without a license qualifier, the firm's initial license application will be denied. Also, any change in the qualifier's information or a change in qualifier altogether must be reported within a short period of time. Usually this is within 30 days, but in some states it can be as few as 10. Now, now we know that changes in qualifiers can happen for all kinds of innocuous reasons, such as an individual moving home addresses. They can also happen for more significant reasons, such as an individual departing the firm through retirement, resignation, or winning a lottery. Whether these changes are sudden or unexpected, firm management needs to be ready to update state licensing boards. If an existing qualifier leaves and no one holds the proper state license, someone is going to have to sit for an exam. And if the firm does not report the change, states can and do assess severe penalties for operating without a designated qualifier, up to denial of the firm's right to practice. Since nearly every licensing board asks about legal and financial action occurring in other states, the damage can spread across all of your business and range from financial to reputational and everything in between. This is why managing qualifiers is mission critical for the firm. Here's what you can do to meet this challenge practice. Know which qualifiers will be designed or designated. I'm sorry. Next, ask your team. Do you know who your firm qualifiers are currently? In which states and entities are they acting in that capacity? If that person leaves the firm tomorrow, who could fill the role within a few short weeks or even days? Answering these questions will identify any gaps you need to address. Lapsed licenses it may incur penalties to reinstate, so it's better to tackle these issues head on. Once your licenses are in order, work to identify individuals who could step in as a replacement qualifier. Firms should work towards having a contingency plan, especially in key jurisdictions. You must consider the state processing time. We'll talk more about this, but you probably know that licensure involves multiple agencies. Many licensing boards have had a handful of staff meet on infrequent basis, such as monthly. This expanding the application simply may not be possible regardless of who handles their submission. The state of New York, for example, can take upwards of 4 months to approve the formation of a design professional corporation, and that's assuming everything was submitted in exact accordance with the state's rigorous standards. As a result, management must take a significantly larger term view with respect to licensing. Compliance becomes integral to the firm's ability to pursue out-of-state opportunities as well as to maintain right to practice on an ongoing basis. It is simply not possible to react and attempt to pursue licensure in response to an opportunity most times. That opportunity will have already passed. Finally, much like managing firm licenses, firms need to invest in a way to manage qualifiers. An ideal solution includes software to track qualifier information across the states. Give management immediate visibility of who's licensed where, and produce an actionable list of tasks wherever a departure occurs or is imminent. The next area I want to dig into is applying for professional licensure in the first place. There are over 800 state and local license requirements across the US. Researching and understanding the varying requirements for each license type in each jurisdiction is a massive challenge. Each state may have business and licensing regulations with certain prerequisites, including firm licenses, individual qualifier licenses, and entity registration. It's important to understand the order in which applications and supporting documents must be submitted. And not only do you need to apply for and secure these licenses, but you need to communicate them to the rest of your firm. The marketing team wants to submit bids, but they can't bid in states where the firm isn't licensed yet. You need to make sure they have a clear insight into where they're already licensed so that they can act on new opportunities. Similarly, HR might want to hire employees in a new state, but they don't know whether the firm is already licensed there. So they might miss out on highly talented candidates. I'm tripping over my words here today. Apologize. One of the most common times that firms need to obtain a new license is when they're expanding into new states, which brings us to the next topic of foreign qualification. When registering for foreign qualification, the exact requirements can vary tremendously. And AEC firms are practically suspicious to hyper-specific restrictions. I apologize. First off, different states can structure the process differently and can have various forms that need to be filed with the appropriate state agencies, Secretary of State, Department of Revenue, and licensing boards, all before beginning to transact business. Because of these differences, there can also be a huge variation in processing times and expected approval timelines. Take a look at an example in just a minute. It is also important to research each state's process and order of operations between agencies when registering the business in another state, which we'll dive into deeper in another minute. AEC firms face business structure requirements when foreign qualifying too. You're probably familiar with the certain professional entity types like professional corporations, professional association, or PLLC. Professional entities are registered and named at the state level, and the requirements also differ from state to state. In addition, many states have distinct entity name requirements for AE firms. In some states, only companies that are authorized to practice architectural or engineering are able to use those terms in their legal names. Other states actually require that licensed firms use those terms in their name. For firms that were originally formed in the states that don't require one of those words, they may need an assumed name in the new foreign state. That includes the term order to comply. And the forced assumed name must be used in state on everything from tax accounts, firm licenses, and even contracts and invoices. Excuse me. As a matter of consumer protection, states want the principals of AEC firms operating in their states to be licensed, hence qualified to run the practice. But states have varying ownership thresholds. That's one more thing you'll have to consider when expanding your business. And while you're entering all of these new states, don't forget about tax registrations. As you go through the process of expansion, it becomes more and more challenging to lean on different tools and vendors. Centralizing your licenses via one platform can make the expansion process far easier. So you always know where to find the correct information. You can also see the QR code on the screen there. We put together a comprehensive guide for foreign qualification, so definitely use that as a research as you expand. As I alluded to earlier, firms need to fully understand the order of entity structure, naming, and ownership requirements before attempting to register or pursue licensure in a new state, because the order of operations between state agencies varies. In some states, like New York, an engineering firm actually has to begin the process of licensure with the state education department before it registers with the Department of State. In others, like South Carolina, the entity registration happens before the firm applies for its license. And in most states, at least one qualifier must first have their individual professional license first. With all of these different requirements and restrictions, many firms end up creating new entities for their work in different states. That can allow them to better meet the structuring and naming requirements for each jurisdiction. The downside of that is each entity has its own BOI filing requirements, so creating entities creates additional reporting on that side of life. Let's take a closer look at what it actually looks like to obtain licensure in a new state. In this case, New York. Here's an example of a fast-growing Maryland-based firm that had an employee starting in the state of New York in a month. In New York, foreign registration with the Department of State can take several weeks on its own. To set up the domestic design professional corporation can take months. Coupled with the time it takes the Department of Taxation and Finance to process tax registration applications and the Department of Labor to set up unemployment tax accounts, you can conservatively add 3 weeks to another month. That means that to get started at a minimum in the state of New York is 15 weeks before the employee's start date. Any additional delay jeopardizes the firm's ability to onboard and pay that employee. Firms everywhere are running into the same issue. Setting up in each state, especially when filing and securing the various registrations and accounts across agencies, it takes time. With out-of-state registration, it's not practical to wait until you have an employee ready to start, and it's not efficient to repeat the scramble in each and every state. Management, and especially HR and legal teams, need to be in lockstep, reviewing the hiring pipeline and ensuring registrations are in order as soon as it becomes feasible. The next area I want to focus on today is renewals. You're all set up and fully licensed in a new state, but eventually you'll have to renew those licenses. So what does that entail? To start, there are some obligations that every business has that must be renewed regularly. We've touched on each of these items already: qualifier licenses, firm licenses, Secretary of State registrations, and any unique state requirement. Renewal applications usually require proof of good standing from the Secretary of State as well. And keeping all of these up to date is important because there are consequences if a filing is missed. If a business misses even a single filing, it immediately faces consequences that start with late fees and increase all the way to administrative action and the denial of the right to do business in a state. Administrative action can usually be undone by a process called reinstatement, but the firm pays back all the back taxes, filing fees, and penalties, but it's a costly and lengthy process. Not to mention, the reinstatement becomes part of the business's permanent record. Sometimes firms that have an entity that no longer operates in a state, so they decide to they decide they don't want to pay the fees of upkeep, the obligation to maintain it. And suddenly they find an opportunity in the state a few months later. But now they've fallen out of good standing and they have to play catch up. They end up paying more in reinstatement fees than the ongoing filing fees. A more cost-effective option would have been to withdraw the entity and reform qualify, or to maintain an agent and file necessary annual reports all along. In general, both maintaining an entity and closing it properly are less expensive and less risky than letting it lapse into noncompliance. We've broken down the renewal process into 4 key steps: research, prepare, submit, and monitor. Let's start with research. The most important thing that you can take the time to know exactly what you need to file in order to renew all of your licenses. Yes, that includes most of the materials you originally submitted for your initial application, but requirements can also change year to year as state governments update their processes. Once licensed in a given jurisdiction, your firm will have a license ID numbers, registration dates, renewal deadlines, and continuously changing requirements to navigate. With over 1,500 different AEC filings around the country, keeping up with the changes and requirements can be time consuming. And as the firm grows and becomes licensed in multiple jurisdictions or specialties, the complexity increases. You also have to ensure that you capture and updated information from your registered agent, whether that's new qualifications, update personal information like a change of name or address, or just a new registered agent entirely. You'll also want to check for any updates to your business formation documents. And maybe most importantly, you'll need to check for any changes to your state's forms and fees. In addition to updating their requirements, states are continuously changing the formats of their forms and exactly what information you need to submit. It can be tricky to stay on top of all these different changing landscapes. Um, so step 2 is actually gathering all of the updated information to submit with your renewal application. There can be a lot to pull together here, so make sure you leave yourself adequate time to avoid late fees. Nearly every state requires entities to file an updated annual report to ensure it keeps current information on record. Because each state has a unique deadline, a multi-state business faces deadlines throughout the year. Reports can be due on a yearly or biannual basis. You'll also need to file annual financial statements along with proof of your qualifiers' licenses and their continuing education certificates. Make sure you're tracking these in one central location as they completed throughout the year so that you don't have to hunt them down at renewal time. You also need to pull your current surety bond and insurance documentation to ensure that those are in good standing and compliant with the state's requirements. Many states also require the business to file and pay taxes to maintain corporate good standing, such as California, New York, and Texas. Pulling all these documents together every time you have to every time you're at a renewal deadline, which, as we mentioned, can be different times of the year for different states, can be a hassle. So it's essential to keep them stored in one central location to expedite the process. The third step in the renewal process is actually submitting your renewal applications. And the most important part here is to hit your deadlines. You don't want any unnecessary late fees or potential hiccups that can impact your ability to do business. Make sure you're tracking different renewal cycles, while they're yearly or every 2 years, whether it's the first of the month or on the anniversary of the initial licensing, or a different date entirely. Many firms expect their individual engineers to manage their own continuing education and license renewals, but that can increase the risk because the firm has no oversight. Because even a single lapse license from a qualifying engineer can have major consequences, the firm should invest in a solution that, at a minimum, gives management direct insight into the status of practitioners in any state at any time. Finally, be aware the more jurisdictions you expand into, the more complex time and consuming this process can become. Be sure you're allocating the proper resources and implementing the right systems to streamline it. Rely on spreadsheets and manual reminders runs the risk of a critical lapse, leading to direct financial penalties. More importantly, it risks a gap in the ability to operate and secure a new business. Finally, once you finish your renewal application and have been approved, you will want to monitor for any changes. As mentioned, state legislators are always passing new regulatory bills and department level changes. It's vital that you stay up to date, which can be a bit overwhelming if you're in multiple states. Some states also require that you file immediate updates to your license if certain events occur. For example, I mentioned earlier that a change in qualifier requires an updated filing, typically within 30 days, but sometimes as quickly as 10. You need to make sure you know exactly what events will trigger maintenance filings in each state so that you don't miss any deadlines. You also have to ensure that you're maintaining good standing with the Secretary of State and Department of Revenue in each state. That means staying up to date with taxes and fees, maintenance filings, documentation, and more. As mentioned earlier, many licensing jurisdictions stipulate that business maintains internal records and follows certain governance or ownership requirements. They may or may not need to be reported on a license renewal application, but most licensing agencies have the authority to enforce and penalize governance violations. Once we have one customer who is headquartered in Texas, but they now operate in 23 wholly owned subsidiaries across 9 states. As they expanded, they found that subsidiaries weren't keeping their compliance data well organized, and their executive administrator was spending more time on license filings than her primary job responsibilities. Once they switched to our centralized platform, they were able to automate renewals, reporting, and regulatory tasks, and track update requirements easily. To recap, there's a lot to keep track of, especially if you're doing business across multiple states. As you see on the side, there are 800 plus AEC licenses, 1,500 plus AEC license filings, 2,000 US filing authorities, 20,000 unique filings, Secretary of State licensing and tax, 50 plus state CE credit requirements. To best keep track of these changing requirements, we recommend a few best practices. First, be sure to conduct a review each year. This isn't just a review for your documentation and business information, it's a review of your internal processes. You should be looking regularly to see how better manage your internal records to make sure that they're ready to quickly file when it comes time. Second, you should make sure to incorporate new requirements into your licensing and compliance management system. As those requirements change, manual systems like spreadsheets can quickly become outdated, so you'll need to update them regularly. Finally, allow ample time to complete new applications and filings. If there's one thing that you should take away from this presentation, it's that this process takes a lot more time than you initially think. So you should never wait until the last minute to start the renewal process. I'm going to do a poll question here quick. Went ahead and launched that. If you would like to participate there. Give this a quick minute here. I'll go ahead and end that poll. For the most part, it looks like spreadsheets are the winning number there for how your license is managed. So at this point, we've covered key licensing, entity, and tax issues, both as concepts and in example forms. Let's now talk about specific ways a firm can navigate this regulatory environment. It all starts with a proactive and comprehensive system for compliance. As you'll see, it involves a top-down strategy as well as the right people, process, and technology to execute. There are key components of what proactive compliance system might include. Those include establishing a system for business information records, tracking entity tax and licensing data, managing corporate tax and license filings, maintaining registered agents, timely notification of key staff. Have command of the renewals of firm and professional individual licenses, incorporate CE requirements and certifications, defining internal roles and processes. To be clear, every firm is unique. What we share here is general in nature and based on our extensive experience working with organizations of all sizes. But we encourage you to take these ideas back to your management teams and legal counsel in order to shape your overall compliance program. Harbor Compliance offers a solution for many of the challenges you've heard presented today. We've taken these strategies and built a suite of services and software around them. We've built cloud-based compliance software and continuously maintain a database of nationwide requirements. It keeps everyone in your organization up to date on your registration status in each state. It provides a secure, efficient, and effective way for your organization to maintain and access essential compliance information. Of course, organizations that register in multiple states and have multiple entities gain additional value. Access to our software is available as part of our managed services or standalone. There are 4 purpose-built modules: License Manager, Entity Manager, Tax Manager, and Records Manager. So when we talk about needing a single place to manage registration data, records, and reporting deadlines, our software modules do just that. They provide your organization with valuable reporting insight needed to easily assess where your business is registered. At this point, thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, today's session is eligible for continuing education credit through Earmark. You can also use this QR code on your screen to download the Earmark app. And after the session concludes, we'll email a 5-question quiz. Once you've completed the quiz, you'll receive your certificate. At this point, I want to thank you for joining us today and offer you a free compliance score where we'll verify your compliance status for various business entities you have set up nationwide. If you're interested in getting a free Harbor compliance score, please let us know in the chat box or reach out to us after this presentation. Thank you again for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your week.